And for having me here today. Thank you for coming on such a nice, lovely spring afternoon. Before I jump into the topic, which is the humans' challenges in modern-day nature conservation, I would like to introduce myself a little, my previous work. So, as you now can all see, my name is Claudia Grünewald. I'm a biologist and I majored in ecology. And before I started working for NABU almost 2 years ago, I worked at the University in Mainz on ecosystem functions, mainly seed dispersal of wild cherries by large mammals. Then I followed my professor to Frankfurt to the Senckenberg Biodiversity Climate Research Center and shifted my research focus on ecosystem services and social-ecological systems. And I conducted several studies on the relationship between biodiversity and wildlife tourism in African savannahs. And here I used geographical methods and modeling tools, but also methods from social sciences like surveys and interviews. And then in 2006, I joined NABU as the head of species conservation. And as previously said, so NABU is one of the largest and also oldest nature conservation organizations in Germany. It was established in 1899. At the moment we have more than 600,000 members, more than 30,000 volunteers, and also 2,000 local groups, and regional offices in almost every federal state in Germany, except for Bavaria actually. So we're a different organization. We're partners, but it's a different organization is covering the area. So me, myself, you will most of the time find in Berlin at our headquarters. Headquarters is divided into 4 departments. So we have communications, we have administration and accounting, we have also an international department, and the Department of Nature Conservation and Environmental Policy. And this is where I'm based. Luckily not alone, so my team has 3 members at the moment, and we mainly work on wolf conservation and wolf management, but also bat protection. We also work on invasive species and on traditional forms of land use of grazing in order to increase species diversity. Most of our work is national, but with strong connections to the EU level in most cases. But we also work on other topics, things that are generally related to mammals, to wildlife. We work on human-wildlife interactions, hunting practices, general aspects of species conservation, and of course wildlife management. So when we look at wildlife species these days, they don't really need remote forests or wilderness areas anymore. Sometimes even not protected areas. They live in the same habitats as humans, and they're even quite well adapted to humanly modified landscapes. So you have one group of species, like the fox or the wild boar, that have always been here, but they have really well adapted to cultural landscapes. They even inhabit urban areas or major cities that we're in. So I meet foxes on a regular basis on my way home. We have another group of species that have been introduced by humans, unintentionally but mostly intentionally, and they also find quite suitable habitats and food in our cultural landscapes, and populate the landscape. And we have a third group of species. These species have been driven to extinction in the 19th and 20th century, and they now have been coming back to their former habitats over the last 20 years or so. This is because of stable political systems, opening of borders, then of course the EU nature conservation laws, and these species also find excellent food and habitat conditions. So now we have these wildlife species that that live in close proximity to humans. So human-wildlife interactions occur. So now the humans, they do have different interests in their land use, in their properties, and they also may have safety concerns. So conflicts arise. And in earlier days, the reaction to these conflicts usually involved the killing of the problem wildlife or the transformation of natural habitat. But due to societal shift, this killing or this behavior is either illegal and or socially unaccepted. So my colleague said the other day, no matter what we do, where we go, what we want to protect, there will always be humans. There will always be different interests. So we do need some kind of regulation, some kind of management. And literature agrees here. There is hardly any area in the world where there is no wildlife management. So what do we mean now by wildlife management? There's lots of literature out there, lots of slightly different definitions. I want to start with one that, in my opinion, grasps kind of the essentials. So most efforts in wildlife management seek to maintain or enhance positive impacts and constrain or reduce negative impacts. When we go back to earlier days, to the 19th and 20th century, where kind of like first protest movements against nature exploitation started, the focus of wildlife management was rather on the biological dimensions, on expert knowledge, and was deeply rooted in biological sciences. So more modern concepts, they also include the so-called human dimensions and also try to involve stakeholders. And so they also are based in social sciences. And a more modern definition could be wildlife management is the guidance of decision-making, processes, and implementation of practices to purposefully influence interactions among and between people, the wildlife, and the habitats. These are the big three, to achieve impacts valued by stakeholders. So, as a first conclusion, if you remember the species I just introduced, they don't need biological or ecological protection methods most of the time. So it is rather the humans that struggle with their wild neighbors. And so it's kind of like the humans that need management. You may know this famous saying of Amsterdam, managing wildlife means managing humans. So, but it's also the humans that value wildlife or weigh management actions. On the other hand, humans may depend on wildlife species, for example, for hunting or for wildlife tourism. So in order to grasp wildlife management and human-wildlife interactions, we also have to understand the concept of social-ecological systems as a framework in which management occurs. So, in short, wildlife management is really complex and it goes beyond ecology and biology. So, it's the humans. Before we now look at definitions of human dimension of wildlife management, what does that mean? I'd like to go back a bit in history because the field of human dimensions is quite new and still evolving, but the ideas behind it, they're really not that new. So Leopold, he's known as kind of the father of wildlife management. He postulated in 1933 in his book on game management that public wildlife management needed to incorporate social and biological components. And he also recognized that these two disciplines or fields were rather isolated. And also Bernard Schimek, some say he's kind of like the father of modern ways of nature conservation. He also recognized that humans and wildlife interact. So nature and society are coupled, and you cannot protect one without the other, and one cannot work without the other. So more modern concepts of human dimensions of wildlife have emerged in the late 80s when conservation biology was recognized as a scientific discipline. And in the United States, over the last 20 years, a lively community has evolved, whereas in Germany, people have worked in similar concepts like on acceptance of wildlife, but this community rather stayed small and a bit isolated from the US or other international concepts. So, but what do we mean now when we speak of human dimensions of wildlife? So it's kind of hard to break it down, but in a nutshell, it's all human attitudes, norms, beliefs and values, but also perceptions, emotions, such as fear, for example, personal experience, also all sorts of human behavior, and other factors such as psychology, evolutionary history, social, cultural, but also economic processes. That is broad. And this is all related to wildlife, wildlife management, and conservation. And the human dimensions of wildlife usually deal with the conflict situation. And human dimensions of wildlife also tries to use and explore how social sciences can contribute to wildlife management, decision making, and conservation. And it also focuses on the development and implementation of stakeholder involvement concepts. And nowadays you have a huge variety of stakeholders, and the interests and the stakes, they're only growing, and so are human-wildlife conflicts. For example, because the human population grows, so we need more land, we need more food, and hence more animal-human interactions occur. Science is still a very important role, so to objectively describe and understand human-wildlife interactions, but also scientists and managers need to inform and communicate this to the stakeholders and the public, because in the end of this concept, it's the stakeholders that value and weigh this information and make the decision that guides the management decisions in the end. So this is just to give you an idea which disciplines are included in the term social sciences and how social sciences could contribute to conservation. I just don't want to go into detail, but I want to point out that paper that appeared in Biological Conservation about 2 years ago, which is an interesting read if you want to learn a bit more on the topic. So I want to explain one concept a little further. It's a concept that was postulated by Michael Manfredo. When we look at attitudes and values, they're both important to understand, but they are of a different quality. So attitudes, they rather describe an evaluation of a specific event, issue, or behavior. And they can be used to predict a specific behavioral response. Whereas values, on the other hand, they can comprise and also predict a wide variety of attitudes and behaviors, because values are the enduring foundational ideals of a society. And so Manfredo says, values towards wildlife allow us to describe segments of the public in ways that allow us to anticipate and understand human-wildlife conflicts. And this concept called wildlife value orientation, it differs between two main dimensions. So we have domination and mutualism. And you can use surveys to distinct between these two groups in society. So domination means that people perceive wildlife management as a benefit for humans. So they tend to prioritize human well-being over the well-being of wildlife. And they also tend to rather accept the death or harm of wildlife in the process of management. Whereas in mutualism, people perceive that wildlife is capable of relationships and trust, and that wildlife deserves rights and care. And these people are less supportive of harm and death in the process of management. So mutualism has is kind of like the main domain for Europe and the United States. This is due to modernization since World War II. So with increasing urbanization, wealth and income, societal needs shifted from rather naturalistic well-being to a sense of belonging and self-possession. So, but this also increases conflict somewhat, because when Freda also says, and colleagues before him have said the same, that most human-wildlife conflicts are actually human-human conflicts. And with this, I want to go back to real-life example, which is, well, I think it's really exemplifies what human dimension means and why we need to incorporate it more in our work, and that's the wolf and the return of the wolves to Germany. And before I explain this any further, I just would like to give you a few information, a bit of background about the return of the wolves. So the last record of a pack dates back to 1850. The last wolf was killed in 1904, and in 2000 the first wolves returned to Germany. So they came from the east. They came on their own. It's a common misbelief that nature conservationists introduced them on purpose. No, they came on their own. They came on foot. That was also due, as I mentioned earlier, to new nature conservation laws that were strictly enforced in the 90s. And also here in Germany, the wolf found an excellent prey basis. So roe deer, red deer, wild boar are exceptionally high at the moment in Germany for the last couple of years. So last year we had 6 packs and 13 pairs, mostly in the northeastern part of Germany. But most of the federal state had at least some transient individuals. So for about 100 years we didn't have any wolves. Now we have wolves again, and we have to learn to deal with that. And it's kind of an interesting thing that people in Germany, also Europe, are quite willing to protect wildlife in the world, in Africa or Asia, but when it comes to protecting wildlife in their backyards, that attitude changes somehow. So the wolf is really a phenomenon. So different interests really clash here. So on one hand, we want the wolf to remain in Germany, we want to protect the wolf, not just because it's the law, but we also are confronted with actual conflicts. So livestock depredation happens and we need to find solutions for this. Then we also deal with real, sometimes irrational fears. That's also a really complicated concept. But we also deal with really old stories, fairy tales, and myths. And the wolf really stands out among other wildlife and other human-wildlife conflicts, at least in my opinion, because it can really cause massive, emotionally heated political and social discussions. it frequently makes the news, it covers the media, and it also affected the fate of entire government elections. So the wolf really stands out. And in my opinion, this is a really good example for human-human conflicts. And scientists, social scientists from Norway, they found in their studies that for Norway, this is really true. It is not about the wolf anymore. So it is about conflicts between people over wolves. And these conflicts are embedded and influenced by other already existing conflicts in the society. So for me, that emphasizes that it is really important, especially when you deal with such an animal as the wolf, and wildlife species as the wolf, that you need to incorporate human dimensions of wildlife in your work. So for us, that means in our communication strategies, in our wildlife management and conservation concepts. And we already started a bit. So what we do is we collaborate very closely with stakeholders, with farmers, especially with sheep farmers. We work with them on problem solutions, so for instance herd protection measures, but it also includes to find ways to set the right financial and political framework to actually protect herds. And that may seem simple, so we collaborate with farmers, but that was actually quite a big deal. So we started last year, and that was even newsworthy. And a set example, because nature conservationists and farmers, they're not supposed to collaborate by default. That just doesn't happen. So this is a big thing, and we hope we can do some good and work together towards a better future. And what we also did, we conducted a survey in Germany to assess the attitudes and perceptions of the people towards the wolf. My apologies, some of the graphs are in German, but I think you will grasp the essentials. And so one of the results showed that despite some problems and conflicts, the majority of people, so 55%, actually perceive the wolf as rather or very positive. So now it's up to us to further analyze these data and results and to incorporate these findings in our communication and our wolf management and our ways to deal with this whole situation. Because the wolf got really big, we just talked about this earlier, it's a massive phenomenon, and it's not really always about the conflicts anymore. It's a huge societal debate that we have to understand in order to do some good and proper management, not only the wolf benefits, but also the people. So, human dimensions of wildlife in a new field. I think we've learned that it's not a new field, but to me it sometimes feels like it, especially here in Germany and in Central Europe. And I'm quite proud of what we do already, but this is just the beginning, it's just not enough. And I think that we, and by we I just not only mean the NGOs, we need to embrace human dimensions of wildlife more and need to integrate it and incorporate it into our daily work. So this will only work in interdisciplinary approaches. And moving forward in a new field is not easy. And what makes it a bit more complicated, at least sometimes in my opinion, is that many of us nature conservationists, we are natural scientists at heart. So we studied biology, we wanted to understand nature and wildlife, we wanted to protect nature and wildlife, but we didn't really want to work with humans. But as we've learned so far, biology and ecology is just not enough. So last year I attended a conference on human dimensions of wildlife, and one of the speakers, she was a psychologist, and she kind of like complained a little about us natural scientists, because we're rule sticklers, we rely on patterns, and humans, she said, humans do not follow patterns. Humans are messy. And I love it. That's what she said. So, we that we love wildlife have to find those that love the humans. And we have to work together to make it work. So working with colleagues from different disciplines, it's not easy. So I know this from my own experience. When I first got in touch with social-ecological systems and my colleagues from social sciences, I had to learn a lot. But they also had to learn a lot. And we had to find a common language. But we were willing to do so, and this is quite important. And we went the extra mile, and we made it work. And it was worth it. I wouldn't want it any other way anymore. So that's why I'm that interested now in human dimensions of wildlife, and I want to continue working on it. So towards the end, I want to give you some of my personal observations and ideas from my own experience after having worked in science and mostly abroad, like in Southern Africa, and now working more national and in an applied nature conservation agency. I want to tell you a bit about what I think is needed to move the field of human dimensions in Germany and Europe forward. So, for one, I think we need a conceptual framework of wildlife management that is implemented on all governance levels. We also need to recognize the importance of human dimensions of wildlife for the future success of conservation. And we need also to gain a common understanding. And when I say we, again, I just don't only mean the NGOs and nature conservationists. That also includes research and science, that includes government and politics, that also includes ministries and wildlife authorities. For example, there might be a good idea for ministries and wildlife authorities not just to employ natural scientists or wildlife managers, but also to employ social scientists or psychologists, for example. And I think here we can also learn from other countries, because in the US, for instance, they already do that. And I mentioned that earlier, we do need more research, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research on this topic. And not just to promote the field of human dimensions of wildlife in general, but also to answer many of the open questions that there are. So, for example, there's still the so-called attitude-behavioral gap. So we may understand what attitudes people have, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we know how they will act upon it. So we all know recycling is important, but do we do it all the time? So this is still an open question. And last but not least, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and it's kind of like a matter of the heart to me, but it's actually not a really new idea, and I know that many of my colleagues would agree. We need more exchange between science and applied nature conservation, and that goes in both ways. And with this last remark, I want to thank you all again, and I want to conclude my talk. Thank you.
I don't want to take all the questions, but would you like to give an example at what stage you are with the farmers at the moment?
So last year we published a short paper together where we agreed on like 7 points that we both think are important to make wolf management work, but also to allow the people to have their sheep to keep farming. We had a big event for that, so a press conference, and we also had an evening event also where all the different stakeholder groups met outside, and one of the farmers had his sheep with him and his livestock guardian dogs, so to really get your hands on the whole matter. And now we keep working on that paper I mentioned, this bullet points, and try to accomplish those. So, yeah.
That was actually my question, that if you could further explain the collaboration with the sheep farmers. Do you also give them financial compensation if something happens, or could you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, we cannot give compensation. So in Germany, that's a matter of the state, the government, and there are programs already in place. So it's every federal state. They have the possibility to compensate losses and also to help the farmers to set up the protection measures. But in our opinion, that's still sometimes not enough, so sometimes the financial support doesn't cover all the expenses, and especially for the sheep farmers, because the wolf is not their only problem. So they struggle to find young people that want to do their job because they move around a lot, so it's really a hard and basic life, and people are not willing to buy their products anymore and to pay high prices for the products. And now we have the wolf on top. So it's also really a complex thing. It's not just about the wolf. And so we also agree on this level. So what we also want the government to do is kind of like to establish a center that kind of like collects all the knowledge that we have on herb protection measures, that also further develops herb protection measures in some areas like the Alps or on the dikes close to the ocean. There's still open questions. We just don't know how to do it at the moment. So that's just 2 or 3 of the bullet points we read about. You can download it. It's on our website.
Thanks for your talk. I enjoyed it. In the beginning of the presentation, you briefly mentioned that the return of some wildlife species to Europe, also to Germany, was at least partly thanks to European policies. Could you give some more detail on that? I don't know if it's flora, fauna, habitat, or...
Yeah, the nature habitat directives and the Fahrrichtlinie.
That's what you mean? Or
that's what I mean, yeah. That's the overarching concepts that the European member states had to implement within their borders. Yeah, and then how long you can actually see it after 1990. Opening of the borders was certainly one factor, and political systems, especially in the eastern part of Europe that are not part of the EU. But also the strict enforcement of the FFH-Richtlinie and Natura 2000. For the wolf, more the FFH-Richtlinie helped a lot. Because until 1990, some wolves already crossed the border into Germany, but they were shot. But after 1990, that changed.
So, I'm not an expert on this subject, obviously, but this FFR directive and the Natura 2001, they both require the member states to implement a number of protected areas or a certain area of protected landscapes in their countries. So where exactly is the difference between the two? How do they work? I mean,
it complements each other, but obviously for species as the wolf, setting aside protected areas as the Natura 2000, that won't help, because the wolves, they just need large home ranges and they move in all of the landscapes. They will never just fit into a protected area. And this is where the Habitat Nation Directives and Paris actually that's what they try to do, to also help protect species that move outside of protected areas.
Thank you.
Could you maybe give an example of different projects you're working on besides the wolf?
Well, the wolf makes most of our day, so it takes a lot of work and time. Yeah, bat protection, for instance, what we do here is mostly education and communication, and there is a huge bat community out there. Many people, volunteers, citizen scientists, if you want to call them so, that are really interested in protecting bats and doing projects on them. And I think I showed on this slide, we have a project called Bat Cities, where we kind of like, the project aimed at getting all the volunteers together that like to work on bats, to educate them in using some of the tools and the methods, like the bat detectors and these kind of things, and kind of like how to get other people interested in their work. And we had 3 major cities, was Hamburg, Leipzig and Berlin. And that was quite successful. But before that, we have to try everything we can to make it work with non-lethal methods. And I think there's a lot of room here.
You have told us, thank you for the very interesting talk. You told us a lot about the wolf and the problems with people and stakeholders. In the beginning, you have said you are responsible in the NABU for species. And I think you are responsible for all the species. Why did you concentrate on your talk in the second half on one species and concern to the biomass of the whole state? It can be neglected, and other problems, for example, insects in the agriculture or so on, which are more important if you weight it on the biomass and also on the number of species. We haven't heard anything about, and I would be interested to have some of your opinion. And what's the main problems you see in the Federal Republic?
So we can't do it all. So we just have limited resources. We have to focus on some topics. We have to prioritize. And so my team at the moment is more the larger mammals that we work on, and the wolf has a long tradition in NABU, so they're kind of like also evolved. So my team just formed 1.5 years ago, and we're still kind of like developing and evolving. So our topic selection might change. But the insect problem, for instance, other colleagues from different teams are working on this quite a lot actually at this moment. So that was one of our main topics in the whole coalition building after the government election. So we have established an action program to save the insects in agricultural landscapes, and we're well aware of this problem. It's really one of the main topics at the moment. We're just not based in my team.
Any other questions from the audience? So now, since Sustainable Resource Management is an international program, and there are students from 40 countries that are participating in the program, and you're working in one of the vibrant organizations. So what's your perspective on international sphere of wildlife management? If you could share your perspective.
I think I may have mentioned it before, touched upon it, wildlife management is different in other countries. So after my time in Africa, it kind of like was a big surprise for me coming back here and experiencing what discussions were going on here. So in South Africa, it's perfectly normal that you have to do wildlife management, that you have to count animals from time to time. It's just part of the daily business, and it's also a bit more about livelihoods of It may be because people in Southern Africa are used to the wildlife. It had never been gone. Here in Germany, we have to learn to live with it again after like 100 years. And we also have like a different landscape. So here in Germany, it's already small scaled. Most of the landscape is used somehow or inhabited. Whereas in other countries like South Africa, also in the US, you have huge areas where just no one lives. So there are differences, but I still think that we can learn from other countries to maybe sometimes be a bit more relaxed about the whole situation and to actually work on the problems instead of like discussing over again.
Any perspective on Latin American countries and developing countries like India, China?
It's not my area of expertise. Many of my colleagues used to work there, but that's you can't really compare it to like Southern Africa, Australia. That's where I work, so I don't go on the next year. Thank you.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. For me, it's quite nice to be here just as a joke speaker and not as a professor or teacher, as I did it here for some years in this course. I would like to give you some impression on a small area, an old protected area, a national park, and what are the challenges to manage that in changing times. You heard about species coming to Germany, even to this area, but there are some other challenges for managers, particularly those related to natural disturbances. So why was the National Park Bavarian Forest the first national park in Germany founded or designated, especially in the Bavarian Forest or the Bohemian Forest? The answer is quite simple. It was not about natural landscape. It was simply in the middle of nowhere, so there were no boats. It was the poorest region of Bavaria. There was basically nothing. You see the livelihood of people there. And it was a state forest. And these were the main arguments. It was not about biodiversity. It was on the Iron Curtain. And so one core aim was to create a more flowering landscape there with tourism, recreation, and so on. And this was Minister Eisenman. He was at that time a pioneer in thinking in protected areas, and to really develop a strategy of hands-off in a forest was very uncommon at that time. And it's, if you see the debates nowadays in Bavaria and Germany, it's still uncommon sometimes. To set aside a large area and to establish a core zone and to allow nature to take its own course created such pictures. So all these nicely red trees are killed by a small tiny beetle, this European spruce bark beetle, which is able to kill the trees, and in German they call it conserve to death. So now the conservationists did a big mistake and they kill or they allow nature to kill the green roof of Europe. So what is the main instrument? We heard about compensation payments and so on. The main instrument of a national park is the zoning of the national park. Oops. There's something wrong with my map. So what I can explain easily, so you have a core zone and you have a small buffer zone around which is permanently managed even in the future. The idea is to protect the area by negative impacts from outside. We heard about insect dieback in the agriculture land to buffer something like that, but also to protect private forests from bark beetle attacks. And the interesting thing is that we have also a so-called development zone, and if you go around Germany to other national parks, you will find a lot of development zone. And for me, so in the outer part of the park, they established the core zone, the buffer zone, everything was fine. And then they enlarged the park by almost 10,000 hectares. And they say, oh, we don't want to have such bark beetle, rapid killing trees events. So they say, we will accompany nature for the next 25 years, and we will do salvage logging to protect the forest from the beetle. And we will talk about that later, but I use these in the course, in the SRM course, always as an example where roundtables, stakeholder involvement can be very, very negative. And I'm very skeptical on these concepts because our park is an excellent example where at the end you have a very stupid management. Because it's the compromise of politicians which are elected exactly in this small time window, and you are manager and you have to do this, follow these regularies 10 years, 15 years later, and you say, why have they been so stupid? And then they explain you, yeah, this was the compromise which was possible. So be careful with involvement of stakeholders. So what kind of species we have? Just to show you some attractive species like the capercaillie, a huge bird living in these alpine habitats, the black stork, which is increasingly common in Bavaria in many forests. Of course, many people love the red ear because of the nice voice in the autumn. They like the big antlers, and so many people are attracted by that. We, or when I say we, I mean the Czech colleagues reintroduced the lynx in the 90s successfully, and we have now a nice population between 1,600 individuals in the whole Bohemian forest. So it's a common cat now behind my house. We can hear them in the rutting season. And as we heard, not with some delay, the wolves found also the huge population of red deer in our national park. They settled down, and we had the first puppies last year in our park. We still lack a bear, brown bear. We have no chance on brown bear. We have also moose. So moose is passing the park once per year, roughly. It's not a typical moose area or moose habitat, but there is a small population on the Czech side, which is established, and an increase of the population is mainly controlled by Austrian hunters who rent the hunting grounds around this population in Czech Republic and take them illegally. So these are the species which were, I want to give you some information of the introduction. So the Strix uralensis is the largest owl in these montane forests. It was extinct about 100 years ago or 90 years ago, and then reintroduced by Wolfgang Scherzinger. I already mentioned the lynx, but when people talk about reintroduction of species, or they always think about the big mammals, the birds. Most of them, as we heard before, forget the small ones, often the more important ones. And so we work also on the reintroduction of insects. So we introduce extinct beetle species. We also reintroduce extinct fungi species by inoculation, by rearing them in the lab. And even these are methods we use. And there it's much easier. You need no flyers. You need a lock, you need a lab, and then you can reintroduce. And in fact, nobody is really afraid about that. How we are organized. So we have, the park is divided in departments. This is only available in German, I'm sorry for that. So we have a department going on recreation, tourist information, and then education, conservation and research, forest management, which is mainly about bark beetle things, but also removal of former forest roads, and then we have a big central part where all the controlling, all the money is organized. So how are the collaboration? So our research in the park is quite widespread. So we have many universities, you see Marburg, Munich, where we are now, Bayreuth, Würzburg, but also from US, from Czech Republic, where we have a big lab. We collaborate in sequencing of fungi, for example, and so on. So basically, your stuff is much too small to do big things alone in a national park. So, with the reason, what kind of work we can do from a scientific point of view, there is, many people have the view that a park, oh, this is a unique area where you can make excellent research. So, from a scientific point of view, there are many pitfalls in the national park. Basically, God is doing nice things, but they are badly replicated, for example. So, you have killed the whole mountain is killed by barkweed. This is one study site. So what can you do with that? You can compare it with other national parks in the world, for example, but it's not that easy all the time as it seems on the first glance. The research fields we have are ranging from ecology, bioecology, conservation biology, hydrology, climatology. Mycology is very big now. Zoology, of course, has a big tradition with the larger mammals, even in our park. The animal physiology and the socio-economy. So also the human perspective is more and more gaining, as we heard before, in our park as well. Our research topics are biodiversity under climate change, wilding and biodiversity, so which species are favored by this concept, wilding and ecosystem services. And we have a big topic, salvage logging, because we do salvage logging. I will talk more about that later. Of course, we have also the discussion on human-wildlife conflicts. We have a strong focus on remote sensing and diversity, because many of our areas are very difficult to get access there. When you have 300 cubic meter of dead wood per hectare, then working is not that easy and not so easy to reach. And so we use a lot of remote sensing techniques. And of course, because dead wood is a common feature in our forest, dead wood is like a red line in our research. I will give some example of what we studied in the last years and what is the relation to the management nowadays. The first question is, what happens with climate change? We are a mountain area, and we did some research along the elevation gradient, which species occurs where, and so on. And then we found out this is not a new idea, it is an old idea because the same was done in 1905. So more than 100 years ago, the guy did exactly the same. He searched all the small animals, and he described from the collembolon, you know what collembolon are? These very small arthropods on jumping around. And I said from them I took only the larger species. But he studied all beetles, all birds, all plants, and so on. And when we compare these data from more than 100 years ago with our recent data, we see that this is the gray area is what we expect from climate warming. And in summary, you see that Hymenoptera, sulfites, so Diptera, and Coleoptera were much more, were overshooting our expectation. And we still work on that question, why do the insects shift more rapid than we expect from climate warming? And one explanation might be that the metabolism is not following a linear function. It's an exponential function. So an increase of temperature can have exponential or over-exponential effects on the distribution of species. But what we see is that the species communities we have nowadays are totally different from those in previous time. What we learned in this is an old question which was mentioned by Rappaport. For those working in biogeography, have heard about this famous researcher, and he found out that collembolans are darker in the higher elevation than in lower elevation. And we are now currently working a lot with colors as a trait of species. There are papers out already that the darker species or the communities are getting paler by climate warming because the pale species are shifting upwards and filling up the communities dominated by dark species. And it seems that color is a very sensitive trait to microclimate and macroclimate. And we want to understand why do some species shift and others do not, and color seems like one answer in this game. There has been a lot of ecological studies on animals and plants, and my colleague Klaus Bessler just recently finished a manuscript where he can show nicely that the same is happening for fungi. So the sporocarp communities of fungi towards the higher elevation and the northern parts of Europe are more dark. Of course, we also are interested in extinction risk. So I just want to pick out one species. This is Plutus torquatus, in German, the Ringdrossel, and it's a typical high montane alpine species. It is on our highest elevation, and you see we did some forecasts on the climate warming, and this is a species which is clearly under threat. And when we look throughout Europe, we see a decline in the population of Plutus torquatus already now. Now, focusing always on the macroclimate is one part. What we learned from more sophisticated studies where we separate and what is the main environmental variable in the forest from a species perspective? What do you think? What is typical? When you go to a forest, what is different to the beer garden? Or maybe the beer garden is a bad example because there are also trees. Let's say from the campus to the forest, what is the main difference? Yeah, but physically, for you as an organism.
The grass, the roots,
No?
The trees,
The light. So what is it? When you go to the forest, it's more cooler, it's more stable, it's more dark. And this is exactly what we see now when we in a forest, and silviculture is always about shading. Silviculture manage shading in a forest to favor species or disfavor species. And this is a study on fungi, and when you look, this is microclimate. This is microclimate, which means this is the canopy cover. And these are different target variables of different fungi groups. I don't want to go into details here, but you see that the microclimate is regularly in different species more important, for example, here on the community, than the macroclimate. So what we forget in climate warming, we talk always about the mean, an increase in 1 degree. When we put a deadwood in a gap in the sunlight, it makes a difference over the year of 2 degrees. So it's more than the climate warming currently. And this shows that there is a huge buffering in climate, in forest ecosystems, driven by the canopy. And this is one explanation why some species do not react to climate warming, because the variation within the forest is much larger in the temperate forest than by a degree, by the increase of macroclimate by 2 or 3 degrees. When we go to the beetles, to the deadwood beetles, they depend on the resource deadwood. But what is the effect of climate? So what we studied here is the amount of deadwood, and here is the relation of the number of species in cold climates with deadwood and warm. And what you see is, in general, in the warm climate, you find more species or more individuals, but the slope is clearly significantly different. This means that the effect of buffering is more important in the cold climates, where the habitat conditions in general are disfavorable for these insects. We used also some experiments where we put out, to confirm our hypothesis, we put out deadwood in the forest, in cold and warm beech forest, and we found exactly the same amount of deadwood, much more individual species under warm conditions. What this tells us is that when we manage deadwood, we have to be more careful in colder climates than in warmer climates. Of course, we need some deadwood, but it explains how to vary deadwood more efficiently. Another topic, of course, in a national park, when you have such zones, then you have two perspectives on that. As we heard before, we have many perspectives on the same thing, like on the wolf, and it's the same with this. For some people, the forest is dead. For some people, the forest is rewilded. But in fact, it's the same forest. So what we learned here is that when we allow natural disturbance on this huge landscape, some species increase their population heavily. Even those known as natural indicators. Here, this is Androgyella citrinella, our most famous fungus in the park, probably. It was almost extinct in Central Europe and survived only some small reserves. And now it's a very common fungus in our national park, but it needs more than 140 cubic meter per hectare, a huge amount of deadwood. And of course, this is an amount of deadwood which is not easily deliverable in a production forest. So you need some areas where you keep or allow them, each tree to stay dead in the forest. The second perspective, when we go to this bark beetle, of course, we once wrote a paper about from a pest species to a keystone species. So from a production forest manager, there's no question this species is a pest. It kills the tree at the wrong time, and it brings some fungi, some blue chain fungi in the wood which are not valued by the market. But it creates deadwood. It brings sunlight in the dark forest. And when you see, this is an analysis over the species because when we started our research, of course, it turned out that some deadwood species are favored. And people said, yes, of course, because there's deadwood. But if we go on all different groups from harvest men and so on, you see the most old with the dark, the brown dot show a significantly positive effect by the bark beetle, and only one group, wood inhabiting fungi, showed a negative. So overall, the beetle clearly increased the diversity, the alpha diversity in the park, and also the beta diversity. But for local people in the mountain area, the main question is, how about our water? So water is an important resource in this area, and of course, people fear that bark beetle attack will destroy the water quality. And we had a nice situation that we have a long-term series of bi-weekly measured catchment, the water quality in this whole catchment and in two sub-catchments. And you see always that the brown area is the infested, the cumulative infested area by bark beetles, and here you see the nitrate response. And what you see on these larger catchments, you can find some response with the bark beetle, but on the whole catchment, you find nothing. And this is not new, this result, because it was found in Grünewald. The interesting thing is we have a law which is free of evidence. We are not allowed to make a clear cut in a water catchment currently in Bavaria. I think it's still like that. And of course people ask, why is it allowed in the national park to the beetle to kill all the trees, when on the other hand, foresters are not allowed to make a clear cut in a water catchment? The answer is simple, because we have an evidence only on the plot scale, but not on the catchment scale. The law is wrong. There are still a few which say, no, I decide what I shoot in my hunting area, and if there is a risk, yeah, I will take it. But we have the feeling, maybe you have seen, or maybe these students not, there were several, even in the TV, we had several reports about, there was big discussion about illegal lynx hunting, and we have the feeling that during the last 2 years, due to these activities, illegal killing decreased. So the next, and one of our major topics is salvage logging. So from a forest perspective, when a forest is blown down, removing the trees is very common. And we are used to that. In fact, we have the prediction says we have to expect more fires in the world, more insect outbreaks, more windstorm. We are nowadays somewhere here, but you see it's still going on, the prediction. So after the storm is before the storm. And this is exactly what you see here, a national park area. This is one of our famous development zones. So we sophisticatedly help nature to get a core zone in a national park, and then over one night, everything turned around. Because God went over the park and blown down a lot of trees. So when we think this is a debate in Bavarian forests, I show you with this map, it's not. So salvage logging, these are all case studies all over the world with salvage logging. And when we look on the affections on the species, we see that there are some groups reacting negative, wood-inhabiting fungi, suboxylic beetles and so on, and there are also some which are positive affected, which is quite common in nature that you have the both effects. So after salvage logging you have more open bare ground or more bare ground in some special habitats which favor some groups. But all in all, we found overall a negative effect of salvage logging, and you have to keep in mind that salvage logging is the common way to deal with a windblow in all production forests. So we lack exactly these kind of untouched disturbance forests. This is the reason why David Lindenmayer and my postdoc wrote this paper, please don't disturb further. So a disturbance on a forest is already a heavy event. When anthropogenic disturbance adds to that, it could be dramatic effects on the species. What we then were looking, stimulated by the discussion in our park and stimulated by this debate about yellow geisha, when you heard this huge debate about salvage logging and protected area, how is it in the world? And you can see that what we analyzed here, these are different areas. If you have this sign here that it's a protected area, and the white circle shows is there salvage logging. And what you see here in Europe and Asia, salvage logging in protected areas is common. And all these conservation agencies and NGOs do not care. There's no outcry. Why? Because, as we heard, we are not used to wolves, but we are used to remove damaged trees. This is our tradition. And for people, such a forest looks chaotic, and to clean up the forest is something, on first glance, many people agree with. So we asked, why do they, in protected areas, remove trees? And the interesting answer was timber. So the first motivation is to take out timber from an area where common logging wouldn't appear. The second, as we know from Bavaria, is pest control. And when you look on the decision levels, then we see all are involved. The national level, the state province level, the regional, and also the area managers. Therefore, we formulated 5 key policy reforms. Salvage logging must be banned from protected areas. So this is a picture from our national park. So this is the result of a round table and stakeholder involvement, not of scientists. Forest planning should address altered disturbance regimes for all intact forests, because all forests are affected. The problem is you have to make the plan long before the event. David Lindenmayer published in 2008 such a paper. The common thing is, now we have a storm, now we have a moth outbreak, and then everybody's running around and there's panic and we need management, and then the conservationists are coming and no, we have no time for that, we have to go ahead. So you need a plan before, that's important. And the next thing is we need more comprehensive analysis on that, where we check on the economic benefits, on the ecological benefits, and even on the social costs. Most of these activities are paid by your money, by our taxes. They are not profitable often. And one of the major points is we need more education of people to get a deeper ecological understanding of natural disturbance. However, sometimes you need innovative solution, and one word from my former PhD student, now postdoc Simon Tornis, about bark scratching. So there can be the situation you have a spruce tree, you cannot keep it there because a private forest is next to it, let's say 100 meters, and you know the bark beetles will colonize the trunk and then they will fly to the next trees. You are responsible, you are a park manager, you are the responsible person. So what they develop, this is the common way. This is how conservationists did it for 20 years without any evaluation. So they debarked the tree and said everything is fine. Of course, when you are a deadwood ecologist, you know bark is the critical first step for many species to colonize a trunk. So he compared 3 different levels. The control, like this one, the debark and the scratch, is scratching. And you see on the pest control, the scratching is quite effective. It's almost the same level as debarking. On the biodiversity, oh no, these are the supporters, sorry, I want to show you. Just don't look on the single graph, just look on this U form. Here is, so most richness is similar in scratched than in